They built the chamber to intimidate. Not with weapons, but with scale. It stretched beyond sight, a hollowed sphere of polished alloy and living crystal, its walls etched with the histories of civilizations older than Earth's first breath. Lights moved like distant stars across its curved surface, each pulse representing a species, a legacy, a power that had already proven itself worthy of existence. At the center, suspended in perfect balance, hovered the council ring, hundreds of seats arranged in a slow orbit, each occupied by beings who had long ago outgrown the need to prove anything to anyone. Except today. Today, they watched. Not as equals. Not as peers. As judges. Humanity's presence was small by comparison. A single platform extended into the vastness, stark and unadorned, deliberately isolated from the grandeur surrounding it. No symbols. No history carved into its surface. No illusions of importance. Just a place to stand. A place to be measured. Whispers moved through the chamber, translated instantly across species, tones layered with curiosity, disdain, and something quieter, unease. They are unstable. They fracture among themselves. They weaponize their own planet before mastering orbit. Acceleration without discipline. Growth without control. The accusations came not with anger, but with certainty. These were not opinions. They were conclusions drawn over decades of observation. Humanity had been studied from a distance, monitored through its wars, its recoveries, its relentless climb from fragility to force. Patterns had been identified. Predictions had been made. And none of them were comfortable. On one side of the chamber, a species of elongated forms flickered with bioluminescent patterns, their communication sharp and analytical. To them, humanity represented inefficiency, an organism that should have collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Opposite them, a collective intelligence pulsed in synchronized rhythm, its voice echoing as one. They saw something worse. Not failure, but unpredictability. A variable that refused to stabilize. Near the upper arc, ancient entities watched in silence. They had seen species rise, peak, and fade. They had witnessed empires that once seemed eternal dissolve into nothing. To them, humanity did not fit the pattern. It bent it. That alone made it dangerous. The charges were formalized, each one projected into the chamber with cold precision. Excessive internal conflict. Unregulated technological escalation. Demonstrated willingness to deploy extinction-level weaponry. Repeated disregard for established galactic protocols. It was not a trial in the human sense. There was no presumption of innocence. Only evaluation. A species either aligned with the stability of the galaxy, or it threatened it. Humanity stood accused of the latter. The platform at the center remained still. A single figure stood upon it, unarmed, unaugmented, and entirely out of place among beings who had reshaped their biology and environments to achieve perfection. No visible enhancements. No defensive constructs. No projection of power. Just a human. The stillness drew attention. Not because it was impressive, but because it was unexpected. Most species, when brought before the council, reacted. They displayed submission. Or defiance. Or fear masked as pride. This one did none of those things. They simply observed. Eyes moving slowly across the chamber, taking in the scale, the presence, the weight of accumulated dominance pressing down from every direction. There was no attempt to interrupt the proceedings. No immediate defense. No visible urgency to respond. That, more than anything, shifted the tone. They do not understand the severity of this moment. Or they do, another voice countered, quieter, sharper. And choose not to show it. The distinction mattered. Because if humanity truly failed to grasp the danger it faced, then the decision would be simple. But if it understood, and remained unchanged, that suggested something else entirely. The council's central axis brightened, signaling convergence. The scattered discussions collapsed into order. Voices quieted. Attention focused. A singular presence emerged, older than most, its authority unquestioned. When it spoke, the chamber itself seemed to listen. Humanity of Earth, The voice resonated, translated perfectly yet carrying a weight no translation could diminish. You have been observed across your developmental cycle. Your progression has been noted. A pause, deliberate. Your species demonstrates an anomaly. Where others stabilize, you escalate. Where others unify, you divide. Where others preserve, you risk annihilation. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. You have been summoned to answer a single question. The lights dimmed slightly, focusing all attention on the solitary figure at the center. Why should your species be permitted to continue unchecked within this galaxy? Silence followed. Not empty silence. Expectation. Calculation. Judgment waiting to be finalized. Around the chamber, countless civilizations watched for the same thing. A plea, an excuse, a justification that might fit within the boundaries they understood. Because if humanity could not explain itself, then the galaxy would decide for it. They did not wait for an answer. The council moved forward as if the outcome had already been decided, and now only required confirmation. Data flooded the chamber, projected in layered streams of light, records, timelines, reconstructed events drawn from centuries of observation. Humanity's history was no longer a story. It was evidence. Wars appeared first. Not as names or dates, but as impact. Entire regions highlighted, populations reduced, infrastructures erased. The scale adjusted, zooming from planetary to continental to individual engagements, each one categorized, quantified, and filed under the same conclusion: self-inflicted devastation. Internal conflict frequency exceeds all recorded norms. Nuclear deployment capability achieved prior to unified governance. Repeated cycles of escalation followed by temporary stabilization. There was no emotion in the delivery. Only analysis. Explosions of light marked the detonation points of weapons powerful enough to scar a world. Simulations ran outcomes. What could have happened, what nearly did. Extinction margins calculated in percentages, each one uncomfortably high. They came close to ending themselves. One voice noted. Multiple times. Another corrected. The projections shifted. Technological growth replaced destruction, but the tone did not soften. Advancement curves rose sharply, far steeper than the galactic average. Breakthroughs stacked upon each other with little pause between them: energy systems, computational leaps, propulsion theories pushed forward by urgency rather than patience. Innovation driven by crisis conditions. Development speed unsustainable without external regulation. To the Council, progress was meant to be controlled, measured, integrated carefully into a stable society. Humanity had done the opposite. They advanced because they had to. And that, more than the weapons, unsettled them. Another sequence unfolded: environments deemed uninhabitable by most species. Frozen wastelands. Scorched deserts. Depths of oceans under crushing pressure. Thin atmospheres where survival required constant adaptation. Humans lived in all of them. Not comfortably. Not efficiently. But persistently. Environmental tolerance range exceeds expected biological limits. Survival strategies rely on continuous adjustment rather than optimization. Where others engineered perfection, humans endured imperfection. The Council did not see resilience. It saw refusal to conform. Testimonies followed. Observational reports from long-range monitors and covert probes, each one recounting the same pattern from different angles. A colony failing, then stabilizing. A disaster striking, then rebuilding. A population fractured, then reorganizing under pressure. Loss does not produce compliance. Adversity increases cohesion in localized groups. Failure leads to accelerated problem-solving behaviors. The language remained clinical, but the implications were not. Humans did not behave as expected. They did not break when logic suggested they should. They did not abandon paths that resulted in suffering. Instead, they adapted to them, incorporated them, used them. A deviation from every established model. The chamber dimmed slightly as the final set of data emerged. Predictive simulations. hundreds of potential futures calculated from current trajectories. Most species followed narrowing paths, eventual equilibrium, technological plateau, long-term stability. Humanity's projections spread outward instead, branching, multiplying, refusing to settle into a single outcome. Expansion beyond assigned sectors. Independent technological breakthroughs outside shared knowledge networks. Potential to surpass multiple established civilizations within a fraction of their development time. Containment probability decreases exponentially with continued growth. Integration likelihood remains low. Compliance projection minimal. The conclusion formed not as a statement, but as an inevitability. This species cannot be guided by standard frameworks. Silence did not follow. A low current of agreement moved through the council, subtle but unanimous. Not fear in the way younger species experienced it, but recognition of risk. The kind that demanded action before it matured. Unregulated progression poses a systemic threat. Stability requires limitation. Expansion must be restricted. The words aligned, overlapping into a singular direction. Control. Not destruction, yet. But something close enough. Through it all, the human remained where they had been from the beginning. No interruption. No visible reaction to the curated display of their species' worst moments and most dangerous tendencies. If anything, the stillness had deepened. That, more than the evidence, created a fracture in the certainty filling the chamber. They do not contest the data. They do not deny it. A pause. Why? It was a question without an immediate answer. Because denial would have been predictable. Defense expected. But this, acceptance without submission. It did not fit. The central presence returned, its voice cutting cleanly through the layered discussions. The record is clear. No hesitation. No ambiguity. Humanity demonstrates patterns incompatible with long-term galactic stability. The weight of the statement settled across the chamber. A judgment nearly complete. All indicators support a single course of action. The light intensified, focusing once more on the lone figure. Your species will be placed under restriction until such time as it can demonstrate controlled behavior. Not a question. A decision waiting only for formal acknowledgement. And still, no response. Not fear. Not outrage. Something else entirely. Something the Council, for all its age and knowledge, had not accounted for. The silence ended because the human chose to end it. No sudden movement. No display meant to command attention. Just a measured breath, followed by a voice that carried without force, clear enough to reach every corner of the chamber without competing with it. You're not wrong. The statement landed unevenly. Across the council, reactions fractured, not in sound, but in expectation. Agreement was not the response they had prepared for. Defense could be countered. Denial dismantled. But acknowledgement removed the foundation they stood on. You catalogued our wars. The human continued steady, precise. You measured our failures. You tracked every moment we came close to destroying ourselves. A slight shift in posture, not defensive, not submissive. And you're right. We did. No attempt to soften it. No effort to reframe the damage. But you stopped there. The words did not rise in volume, yet they sharpened. You saw the fire. You didn't study what came after. A subtle ripple moved through the chamber. We fought, the human said, because survival wasn't optional. Our world didn't offer stability. It didn't give us time to evolve in peace. It forced us to choose, adapt or disappear. Images from the Council's own projections seemed to echo in the air between them. You call it instability. We call it pressure. A pause, deliberate. Pressure shapes things. No one interrupted. When everything is easy, nothing changes. When nothing changes, nothing improves. You built systems that avoid conflict. You removed risk. You optimized yourselves into balance. The human's gaze moved slowly across the council ring. And you stopped there. It was not an accusation. It was an observation. We didn't have that option. The voice lowered slightly, not in weakness, but in focus. We learned by breaking things. Sometimes those things were our own mistakes. Sometimes they were each other. But every time we failed, we didn't stop. We adapted. A shift in tone, not emotional, but grounded. You see cycles of destruction. We see iterations. The word hung for a moment. Each time we fell, we rebuilt differently. Stronger in some ways. Smarter in others. Never perfect. Never finished. The Council's data streams had shown the same pattern. They had labeled it inefficiency. We don't outgrow conflict, the human said. We outgrow the version of ourselves that couldn't survive it. A few lights dimmed along the chamber's edge as observers processed the implication. You evolved in environments that allowed stability. You reached equilibrium and stayed there. That worked for you. A slight inclination of the head. It wouldn't have worked for us. The human took a single step forward on the platform. Not aggressive. Just enough to close a distance that had always been symbolic. Our planet tried to kill us long before we tried to kill each other. Disease. Climate. Scarcity. Predators. We didn't eliminate those challenges overnight. We endured them. Learned from them. Adapted around them. A breath. That mindset didn't disappear when we became advanced. It defined how we became advanced. The chamber remained silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer passive. It was listening. You say we escalate. That we push too far, too fast. A faint, almost imperceptible narrowing of the human's eyes. We do. No hesitation. Because stopping has never guaranteed survival for us. The words settled with a different kind of weight. You see our weapons and assume recklessness. We see them as proof that we understood the stakes. A slight pause. We came close to ending ourselves. More than once. Acknowledged without resistance. And every time, we stepped back from that edge. Not because we were told to. Because we learned to. The distinction lingered. You want controlled behavior, the human continued. Defined progression. Predictable outcomes. Another step, small but deliberate. That's not what we are. No defiance in the tone. Just certainty. We are the result of constant adjustment. Of failure that didn't finish us. Of problems that forced us to become something new. The gaze lifted slightly, meeting the central presence without challenge, but without yielding. You're measuring us against a standard built by species that never had to survive the way we did. A quiet breath. And you're calling the difference a flaw. The chamber felt smaller now, not in size, but in certainty. It isn't. The final words came without emphasis, yet they carried further than anything spoken before. It's the reason we're still here. The chamber did not return to certainty. For the first time since the proceedings began, the structure of agreement fractured. It did not collapse outright, but it shifted, subtle misalignments forming where there had once been perfect symmetry. The Council had expected resistance, not reframing. They had prepared to correct a species, not to question their own assumptions. The human did not press immediately. That restraint carried weight. You think we are the problem. The voice continued steady, deliberate. That our nature disrupts your order. A slight pause. But your order was built to avoid what created us. The statement settled deeper than the accusations that had come before it. You achieved stability early, the human said. You removed variables. Eliminated risk. Standardized growth. No hostility. Just clarity. And it worked. A few members pulsed an affirmation, instinctively defending a path that had carried them to dominance. But stability has a cost. The words did not rise, yet they sharpened. You stopped needing to adapt. A ripple of dissonance moved through the chamber. Your systems are efficient. The human continued. Predictable. Controlled. Another pause. Fragile. That word did not echo loudly. It didn't need to. Several presences reacted, not outwardly, but in measurable shifts. Energy patterns flickered. Communication channels spiked briefly before suppressing again. You haven't faced extinction pressure in generations, the human said. Not real pressure. Not the kind that forces you to change faster than you're comfortable with. A slow breath. So you built a galaxy that prevents it. The implication formed before it was spoken. And now you've encountered something that doesn't fit inside that system. The human's gaze moved across them, not searching for approval, but marking recognition. Us. Silence stretched, but it was no longer unified. You see unpredictability, the human continued. We see possibility. A slight shift forward, grounding the words. You see escalation. We see momentum. The council had language for both. They had categorized both. But they had never placed them in opposition like this. You believe we will destabilize everything you've built. Another pause. You're right. The admission struck harder than denial ever could. Because it wasn't a threat. It was inevitability. We will change it, the human said. Not because we intend to break it. Because we can't exist without pushing boundaries. A faint narrowing of focus. That's what you're afraid of. No one spoke against it. You've spent thousands of cycles refining equilibrium, maintaining balance, ensuring nothing disrupts the structure you depend on. A breath. And now you're faced with a species that grows through disruption. The human did not raise their voice. They didn't need to. That doesn't make us dangerous because we destroy. A slight pause. It makes us dangerous because we don't stop. That was the truth they had been circling without naming. Some of you have already seen it, the human continued. You've observed us beyond your official reports. Studied our behavior outside controlled summaries. A few presences dimmed, almost imperceptibly. You didn't just see conflict, the human said. You saw recovery. Innovation under pressure. Cooperation formed in crisis. The chamber remained still, but attention tightened. You saw what happens when we're pushed. Another step forward, closing the symbolic distance even further. We don't collapse. The words held. We accelerate. That was the part they hadn't accounted for. You call it instability because it doesn't follow your models, the human said. But your models were built on species that stopped evolving once they reached comfort. A quiet breath. We never reached that point. The statement lingered with weight that no projection could replicate. We're still evolving, the human continued. Not slowly. Not predictably. A pause. Constantly. The council had no framework for that. Not at this scale. Not at this pace. And that terrifies you, the human said, not as an accusation, but as a conclusion drawn from everything they had presented. Because it did. Not in the way lesser species feared destruction, but in the way established powers feared irrelevance. You're not judging whether we deserve to exist, the human added, voice steady. A final pause. You're deciding whether you can control what you don't understand. The chamber held that thought longer than any data point. Because buried beneath all the analysis, all the projections, all the conclusions they had formed, that was the question they had been avoiding. And for the first time since humanity entered the galaxy, they didn't have an answer. The council did not deliver a verdict. Not because it lacked authority, but because authority depended on certainty, and that certainty no longer held. What had begun as a structured evaluation had become something far less controlled. Not chaos. Not yet. But the absence of agreement among beings who had built their existence on it. Deliberations fractured across the chamber. Some voices pushed for immediate restriction, arguing that delay would only strengthen what they already considered a growing risk. Others hesitated, not out of sympathy, but calculation. The projections they had trusted no longer aligned cleanly. Outcomes once considered stable now branched into unfamiliar territory. Containment remains viable if enacted now. Probability declines with continued delay. Intervention may accelerate the very behavior we seek to limit. The arguments overlapped, precise yet uncertain beneath the surface. The human did not interrupt. They stood within the shifting current of debate, unchanged by it. No attempt to influence the outcome further. No urgency to secure approval. That absence of need carried more weight than any argument they could have made. Because it revealed something the Council could not ignore. Humanity had not come here to ask for permission. The realization spread gradually, then all at once. You assume this assembly determines your future. A voice finally directed toward the human, sharper now, seeking to reclaim control of the exchange. A pause followed. It expected resistance. It received clarity. No, the human replied, tone even. Not defiant. Not submissive. Certain. A subtle shift moved through the chamber, the kind that precedes irreversible understanding. You invited us here to justify our existence, the human continued. But we crossed into your awareness long before this moment. A measured breath. And we didn't stop. The implication unfolded without exaggeration. Humanity had already moved beyond the point where a single decision could define it. Your conclusion doesn't change what we are, the human said. It doesn't slow us. It doesn't redirect us. A slight narrowing of focus, not aggressive, but unyielding. It only defines how you choose to respond. That distinction settled heavily. Because for the first time, the Council was not evaluating a developing species. It was confronting one that had already begun shaping its own trajectory beyond their influence. We didn't come here to challenge you, the human added. And we didn't come here to submit. A pause. We came because you asked? Nothing more. Nothing less. The simplicity of it disrupted the last remnants of assumed hierarchy. Across the chamber, some presences dimmed into contemplation. Others sharpened, defensive, unwilling to accept a reality where their authority did not dictate outcomes. If left unchecked, your expansion will alter established systems. One voice pressed, clinging to the structure that had defined their rule. It will, the human answered. No hesitation. No attempt to soften the truth. But not in the way you fear. Silence followed, not because the statement resolved anything, but because it forced a different line of thought. We don't replace what exists, the human said. We build alongside it. Around it. Beyond it. A breath. Sometimes that creates conflict. Sometimes it creates progress. Another pause. But it always creates change. That was the constant they could not reconcile. You've spent your history maintaining balance, the human continued. We've spent ours moving past it. The chamber seemed smaller again, not physically, but in the space left for denial. We won't stop expanding, the human said. Not because we want control. A slight shift, grounding the words. Because it's the only way we know how to survive. The truth held steady, unembellished. And survival, the human added, doesn't wait for approval. The Council had no immediate response. Not because they lacked language. Because none of it fit. After a long moment, the central presence dimmed slightly, not in weakness, but in acknowledgement of something unresolved. This assembly will reconsider its position, it stated, the pause within the sentence more telling than the words themselves. Not a ruling. Not a command. A delay? For the first time in its recorded existence, the Council chose not to decide. The human inclined their head once, a gesture neither respectful nor dismissive. Simply complete. Then they turned. No escort followed. No barrier formed to hold them in place. None of the systems designed to enforce authority activated. Because to act now, without unity, would expose a fracture far greater than any one species. And the Council understood that. Humanity left as it had arrived, uncontained. But not unchanged. Because something had shifted. Not in them. In the galaxy? A single encounter had introduced a variable that could no longer be ignored or neatly categorized. Some would move to understand it. Others would move to resist it. It would not matter. Beyond the reach of the chamber, beyond the limits of their structured control, humanity continued forward, adapting, expanding, reshaping every boundary it encountered. Not asking where it was allowed to go. only determining how far it could reach. And for the first time in its long, ordered history, the galaxy was no longer leading. It was reacting.